I've always had a lot of respect for Jack Kirby's New Gods, in spite of the problems, in that it's an unrealized in totality vision. It's there's not a total cohesive narrative to it. There's elements within it which speaks to ultimately what the title suggests: gods, mythology, and the like. And of course, it was peppered throughout the DC universe from the get-go. Unlike after this failed and he went back to Marvel to do the Eternals, which the two properties are always compared to one another, it seemed he made a conscious effort, at least initially, for Eternals to be separate from them. Of course, that didn't last from the overall Marvel universe and whatnot. But for New Gods, right off the bat, the Earth involvement in the broader DC universe was always there. Even though a lot of the interest, at least for me, was the New Gods themselves, of New Genesis and Apocalypse, and those stories and those worlds. I wanted way more narratives about that than seeing how Darkseid interacts with Superman and stuff like that. It's fine to get there eventually for the powerful villain that Darkseid presents, but the real story about Darkseid is about him and his son Orion, and that was a narrative that needed to be pursued with more cohesion, more development, and what have you. It's scattered over time, and in the initial run that Kirby did, you can see it starts out one way, and then it kind of shifts here and there, and then ultimately another. He returns to it over the years, and eventually his Hunger Dogs story was an attempt to just wrap it up at that. But it just other attempts at trying to narrow it down and get it into a more cohesive, broader take on it. Not very few, I think, have landed completely, but the closest would probably be Walter Simonson's run on Orion. And at the time, both he and John Byrne were working on this. Byrne ended up with Fourth World, I believe. And that's another one I'll have to get into. I only have a handful of those issues. But Orion was a good run. It ran 25 issues overall, I believe. And had backup stories that he invited other artists and writers to come in and do some little side tales on it, which were weaved into the overall plot that ran throughout it. Of course, does involve the Earth and everything else there, but he's able to weave it in so it doesn't take away from the overall story of Orion, his conflict with his father, and other aspects of the New Gods mythos. And of course, mythology, the influences there plays out in a way that this is akin to like the tales of Hercules or something of that nature, in the sort of poetic surrealism that one encounters in those old myths. And this plays out here. Now, each time there's an approach to the New Gods worlds, and our Fourth World or what have you, the anti-life equation being the ultimate goal of Darkseid and whatnot plays out. And there's been several versions of it. As much as I like Cosmic Odyssey, which is another story I should do a video on overall, there's a lot of great stuff in it, but it posits the anti-life equation as a separate sentient entity unto itself, which I suppose overall you could incorporate that into it and make it fit overall, for the equation being, well, an equation. And then connecting Earth to it and everything is like, well, the secret to the anti-life equation is to be found somewhere on the Earth. And so, okay, that's why planet Earth becomes significant in the designs of the likes of Darkseid and what have you. But throughout this run for Orion, Anti-Life does play quite the role in it. I don't want to spoil everything, but it's an exploration of ultimate power, and the Anti-Life equation essentially is just everybody obeys whatever you tell them to do once you've achieved it, and that sort of thing. And it's also an interesting take on the attempt of such an awesome power like that just appears evil in and of itself, no matter what, and yet your hero thinks they can wield it for the purposes of good. So it's very much akin to Lord of the Rings and this sort of thing with the Ring of Power. Well, yeah, but if we just used it against the enemy, we could, and it's like, he says, no, you must destroy it. The power doesn't serve you. You serve it, and so on and so forth. And who can resist the lure and that sort of thing. So again, the tropes laid down from mythology of old plays out here more than just, superhero adventure and fight and stuff, which you get plenty of here. And there's all kind of nefarious plots afoot and callbacks to earlier iterations that Kirby laid down and what have you. And it's a shame it didn't go longer than it did. But it's a full-on brutal journey for the character of Orion and the growth. Now, the problem with something like that is it's difficult once you've had moments of epiphany and or a humbling of a very arrogant man, which is Orion. This is one of those a-hole heroes. To some extent, anti-hero. He's very brutal in meting out justice as he sees it to people. And of course, he's the ultimate counterpart to the representation of absolute evil in the form of his father, Darkseid, and that sort of thing. And at the same time, he really takes after his father, but he also takes after his mother, who wasn't all that great either. And there's that whole thing there, as well as this whole families of power and whatnot, and the soap opera that goes on, and arranged marriages and all this sort of thing. And yet still there's this connection, and there's almost a familial relationship there. Is well, I don't really want to kill him because he's my son and stuff like that. You wouldn't have thought there'd be a soft side to Darkseid. And that, again, is a callback to the original run that Kirby did. So it's a really a fascinating run through, and probably one of the better ones of these attempts at making New God's Land. And so I can't help but recommend the run. It's all collected and whatnot, and you can check that out. But as it goes, someone else will come in and change things up a bit, Anti-Life and what have you. But if you maintain it as the basic goal of Darkseid, you're mostly fine with it. And even after you've done a narrative like this, which I think is one of those that's strong enough to say that that's, basically the basic plot of the Orion series should be considered canon in a lot of ways for the character going forward. It's just, he's still got the arrogant a-hole nature to him, but he's wiser than he was before the events. And if you approach it like that, you can still continue with good adventures for the character. But really, a story like New Gods, should it ever actually get a full, complete story, is a beginning, middle, and an end. And of course, for the purposes of a DC Comics superhero series where you want your ultimate villain to always be available, you just got to wiggle in and out of ultimate fates for the absolute story of these characters and that sort of thing. But nevertheless, Walt Simonson's approach is the one to beat should anyone attempt to revisit new gods and respect it and take it seriously, and trying to map out the parameters of it and utilize a solid narrative within those confines, more to itself than, well, we're on Earth and Batman's in this issue and that sort of thing, you know, and next issue Superman, and then okay, we go back to Apocalypse, you know, it's something of that nature. I keep wanting it to go more into the overall mythology of New Genesis and Apocalypse, maybe one day. But as far as what's been done, Walt Simonson's run is the best it gets as far as that approach. So there you go, Orion. Obviously, an inspiration for the father-son story to Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. Death Star looking like Apocalypse. It's hard to deny, even though the idea of Darth Vader being Luke's mother came much later in the development of Star Wars, but it had to have come up here and there, you know. But anyway, Orion. Do check it out. The backup story's got a lot of guest stars. A good Howard Chaykin does one. It's good stuff as well. Within a very entertaining run for Orion.